In this video, I'm going to be walking you through the detailing process that we used for the terrain in Project Pegasus. What we're looking at right now is the source terrain that Ian created. And this is the terrain after the detailing stage, and here it is with the textures applied. In Project Pegasus, we treat the detailing and the texturing as a sort of one-step process or as a holistic process. We built a workflow around kind of authoring the material of the Heightfield altogether like you would inside of a program like Substance Designer. In this video, I'm going to take you through a few examples, starting with a simple example looking at how we can just start to use textures to add Heightfield information. Then we're going to look at the Pegasus Heightfield material node that we built and what it does. And then finally, we're going to set up a network that is able to produce a result like the one we're looking at right now. And to begin with, I'm going to put down a PE load landscape. If you remember the last video, the PE load landscape is essentially a one-stop shop for getting the final files and sort of accesses the latest up-to-date cache of all of the different terrain layers and maps. I'm not interested in the existing color and ID or in the procedural layer. I am interested in the manual layer, but what I want to do instead of accessing them both through this single node is I'm just going to make a copy there and have the first node access the source and the second access the manual edits. And then what we're going to do is just combine both of those layers of detail. And there you have the final result. So that's without the edits. There's the edits all alone, and here they are combined. And what that means is that we have full context when we're creating our procedural pipeline, which allows an artist inside of Unreal to manually sculpt some terrain, and then they can send that terrain back to the cache, open the Houdini project and recook it, and we'll have all of the procedural details sort of conform to those new manually sculpted areas. So to begin with, we're just going to look at the simplest way of adding sort of displacement details to our terrain here. I'm going to go ahead, put down a Heightfield file node. I can just wire this straight in as the output of the layer. And if we look at it, by default, we're going to see this kind of default butterfly picture. Now, I actually want this to influence the height rather than the mask layer. And we can't see anything here, or at least we barely can see anything. And the reason for that is simply we need to increase the height scale. Now we can see that we're getting that information from the texture map being projected as height into the terrain. Of course, it's currently behaving as if it's a stamp. We don't want that. We want it to be a tiling texture because that's what we're going to be using. So I'm going to go ahead and change the border type to repeat. And now we have the basis for injecting some nice displacement maps into our terrain. I'm going to go ahead and open up Quixel Bridge. And I'm just going to go to my local downloads, and I'm going to search for a nice kind of rocky texture. So just clicked on local and I'm going to search for rock. And something I have in mind is it needs to be a surface. So I'm just going to make sure I check surfaces and then plug in rock again. And there's a nice material that I have in mind already for this, which is this Hawaiian lava stone, either the ripple or the this regular one. I think I'll just go with this one. So if I right click it and go to files, because it's already downloaded, it will pop open this window. And then I can copy the path in the Heightfield file node. I can open the floating file chooser like so, paste the path, and then grab the displacement map. Okay, great. So we're injecting some tiling displacement details onto our terrain already. This already looks pretty cool, but ideally we want to be able to control the placement of it. Additionally, the height scale is a little bit high at the moment. We'll leave it like that just because it makes the visualization super clear for the time being. One way in which we can control the placement of this is we can put down a Heightfield layer node we can wire the source terrain into the left input and the Heightfield file result into the second input. And then we just use a Heightfield mask by feature node, like so. And I think that I don't want to project this rock onto the rocks. I kind of want it to be sort of just on all of the sort of plateaus and areas of the terrain like that. So I'm actually going to do, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the slope max to 90, min to 0, and I'm going to do a linear fall off. Inverse, there we go. So now it's sort of picking out all the flat regions. And then I'm also going to mask by height. And again, I'm going to set it to be linear. And then I'm just going to drag down this right-hand side like so. So that we can see it's just grabbing all of those kind of plateau regions. And now the Heightfield layer, if we plug that mask by feature into the third pin, we can see that it's now sort of somewhat controlling where that's getting applied. If we were to disable the mask or even unconnect it, you can see that it's clearly controlling the distribution a little bit. And now I'm going to go to the height scale and I'm going to change that to 10, which I think is a more reasonable scale. It's about 10 meters vertically. And then I'm going to play around with the repetition of the texture. So I'm going to try setting this to 500, which means it's going to tile more frequently, like so. And if we just have a look at the before and after, we can see that we're already starting to get some nice details being added to our terrain. And we could work this way, but as I mentioned before, I want to work in a way, and the way that we worked with Pegasus is that we allowed ourselves to work on both the kind of coloring and the detailing at the same time, so that we end up with a really rich coupling between the color and height information. Very similarly to before, in fact, we can just go ahead and copy the first 3 nodes. What we're going to use this time is we're going to put down a PE material, and that is a PE Heightfield material. Okay, so nothing appears by default, but if I go back to that Heightfield file, copy the file path reference for the displacement map, and paste that into the height channel. Let's just increase the height scale, and there we go. We can see that's now getting injected into the terrain, just like this network over on the left. But we can additionally go and make sure we're assigning the color at the same time. So we're assigning both the color and the height. And lastly, let's control the placement using the mask by feature. And one last thing we need to do is make sure that on the Heightfield material node, we go and tick use mask. Okay, so that's essentially how the Heightfield material works. And there's a few more controls. So if I was to just disable the color once more and increase the Heightfield scale for visualization purposes, we can see that we have all the same, roughly the same controls. We've got the ability to rotate the textures. We've got the ability to modify the size, in addition to the height. And sort of last but not least, we have the ability to add some distortion, which can work really nicely to break up tiling, although you have to play a little bit with the settings to get the results going in the direction that you want them to. But in this case, I don't want to use distortion. I'm going to put the size back to what it was previously. I'm going to remove the rotation. And with that, we're ready to move on to decorating the terrain with some additional layers and really bringing it up to that kind of result that I showed you at the start of the video.